heard of corporate slavery? In this video lesson, we'll learn a little bit about corporate slavery so that you can speak about this in English. To help us do this, I've invited Chris from Kangaroo English to have a conversation with me about corporate slavery. We'll begin with a natural conversation between me and Chris talking about corporate slavery, where you can hear new words, expressions, and grammar being applied in a natural conversation in English, and you can practice using the shadowing technique. At the end of the lesson, together we'll analyze some useful words and expressions which came up throughout our conversation so that you can speak about corporate slavery in English. Now, before you hear the conversation between Chris and I would love to hear from you. Tell me, what do you think corporate slavery is? When you hear the term corporate slavery, what are the first things that come to your mind? I do understand it's a little bit of a tough topic, but this will help you to think in English. Think about those topics you may have to one day speak about in English. By training yourself to think about these topics, you are training your mind to think in English. Friends, before we go on, this episode is brought to you thanks to our members in Using English TP. Have you not heard of Using English TP? Using English TP is a virtual classroom and community teaching English learners around the world real English. Using English TP members receive weekly lessons focusing on interesting topics. Members focus on improving their English skills by looking at grammar in use, vocabulary in use, and most importantly, connecting with each other. Using English TP members are motivated and guided to connect with each other, to speak in weekly group calls to ensure that they are using these new words, expressions, and grammar so that they are improving their spoken English. Become a Using English TP member today and join our virtual classroom and community. Head over to usingenglishTP.com to enroll. Okay, back to corporate slavery, and let's begin by listening to the natural conversation between Chris and myself. What do you think corporate slavery is?
Well, I don't know about you, Adriana, but when I think about corporate slavery, for some reason, the image that appears in my mind is of like a Japanese businessman in his suit and tie, slumped on his desk. You know, in my mind, he's been there for maybe 2 days or 3 days without going home, and yeah, and I imagine that his house is just a tiny shoebox. He lives in a shoebox and he just lives to work. I mean, what's the idea that pops into your mind when I say slavery, you know?
Slavery, something negative. I feel like I'm working a lot.
Yeah.
Corporate slavery, probably someone working for a big corporation, putting a lot of time, dedication. Maybe I don't get this image of a Japanese person sitting at a desk slumped, but somebody just working their bum off for a big corporation, maybe not being paid well or not feeling well about working there.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the idea that both of us have, is that it's not so much the work, because there are lots of people who work really hard, but they are rewarded, right? You know, they have a great salary, or they, you know, can afford to buy whatever they want, and maybe they have great perks in their job. But I think, you know, the idea of slavery is that you're doing all this, but there's no reward at the end, right? It's
yeah. When you think of corporations, what corporations do you think of?
Well, I think the corporation that immediately springs to my mind is actually Google. And I think that's just probably because I'm always doing projects related to Google. Like I'm on YouTube, I'm using Google search every day, and it's a company that now, and this is an argument that's happening in popular culture, is that they have a lot of power. And I think this is maybe another aspect of the idea of corporate slavery, is that the people who are these slaves, not only are they not rewarded for what they do, but they don't have any power. Right?
Oh, but Google is like the dream job to have today. I've heard they have wellness centers. Maybe I'm over exaggerating, but they have pool tables, table tennis, health, gym. It's almost like someone's dream job.
I know, it's like a playground, right? It's like Um, but I think, I think that the reality is probably not, you know, as glamorous as it sounds. I mean, I personally know somebody who worked for Amazon for a short time. And, Amazon is another company which is famed for being very progressive and very modern. But the reality is when you're in that situation, every 15 minutes of your time is accounted for in one way or another. And I mean, to me, that's a nightmare. But to some people, yeah, it's the dream, the dream. So, um, I mean, do you think that there are any types of slavery that when I say the word slavery, can you think of any image that isn't negative?
No. No, it's funny. I always talk about these words tend to bring a positive and negative connotation. And when you
Mm.
use corporate, like corporate life, it sounds, I don't know, if you're watching American TV shows, at the moment I'm watching Suits, and, and
Okay.
you see them looking like really great, working a lot. And it looks great because they're living a corporate life, working in the corporate sector. But when you say corporate slavery, it just, somehow I go blank. I just think of negative thoughts. I don't
Yeah.
think anything positive. Slavery, this word, do you know where it comes from?
Yeah, well, actually, the reason that it's slavery is actually because of Slavs. So, yeah,
Ah,
back in the Middle Ages, Otto the Great was
mhm.
going around conquering everybody, and the main people that he conquered were the Slavs. And after he conquered them, he would take them as prisoners and sell them as indentured laborers. And so, basically, when you call someone a slave, you're basically saying that they're Slavic, which is something that you have because you live in Croatia, which is,
Yeah, and I'm of Slavic origin. Funny thing is, my husband's a history teacher. I'm going to fill him in on this one.
yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and the word itself, as a quick side note as well, this is the reason why Italians say ciao to each other, because in the past, when you met someone, you would say your name and then you would say what you did, like you would say Adriana, English teacher. And so back in the day, the Italians would say, Massimo, Esquiabo. They would say, I'm a slave. And then over time, that Esquiabo turned into ciao.
Interesting how communication evolves, how these different cultural norms become a part of our everyday lives. And I never thought about that before, but it does make sense when you think about it logically.
Yeah, it does. It does. And going back to what we were talking about before, like, I wonder if maybe, in today's world, the word corporation has become a bit of a dirty word. I wonder if the word corporation itself has generated this negative idea.
Maybe, okay, so we're both living abroad, we're both from Australia, and maybe we perceive events happening in Europe a little bit differently to locals here in Europe. I know Spain and Croatia are completely two different countries, but we're both part
Yeah.
of the European Union.
Yes.
And when we perceive corporations, maybe it's perceived, I mentioned Suits before. So when you see big corporations and TV shows, it looks pretty. It looks, well, my interpretation, it looks like, oh, they're living the high life. They're working a lot. They look nice. They're doing good things, maybe sometimes bad things. That's questionable. But regardless, the youth today in Spain or what do you think? Do you think corporate slavery is evident among the youth? Or does it exist in Spain?
Yeah, I think unfortunately it does, and I think Spain is not alone in the European Union for having this problem. Like a few days ago in Italy, there was mass protests from students about this very idea, and it was not so much directly related to corporate slavery, but in Italy they have a program of mandatory work experience, and normally big corporations apply, like McDonald's, Inditex, which is the owner of Zara and Massimo Dutti and Pull and Bear, um, and a few other large corporations. They take students from university and they offer them work experience. And the problem is that the students complain that instead of actually teaching them real skills, they ask them to go get coffee, wait at the table, basically they're not actually providing what you and I would consider training. They're not actually helping them to learn. And in fact, during the protest, one of the Italian students, she had a sign, and it said on it, and I think this indicates the sentiment. It says, "Students have a defect. They know how to use their intellect."
Interesting.
And I think this is an idea, is that the commodity now isn't, we don't need people to go and plow fields. We don't need that type of slave because we have machines for that.
Mm-hmm.
We need this. Your mind is the commodity now. And it's a different concept, but it's still the same, right? I mean, would you imagine that you had just left university and someone offered you a job paying you the very minimum wage, and they asked you to sort of get coffee and photocopy this, and how would you feel about that, do you think?
A great question to be asking. How would I feel about that? So I finished, once I completed university, I actually did do an internship. I was lucky enough that I didn't have to make coffees and do this sort of work. But if I did do that, I think when you are an intern, your creative, I'm lost for words. Your creative thoughts are always somehow maybe put down or put on the side, because you are required to do maybe these labor intensive tasks such as make coffee, photocopy, make coffee, make photocopies. But I don't think I would feel good at all if I did that. I would feel like, why did I go to university? What was the point in studying? And what good can I do in the long term? But if I knew that it was only short term for 1 to 2 months, maybe I would understand that, okay, this is only short term. I have to get used to the system, custom myself to the habits and the culture of the company. But being paid the minimum wage and then knowing that I would lose my job or no possible future, I wouldn't be happy with this. If I knew that it was 6 months and that there would be a future and I would be promoted, progress, then I think it would be bearable.
Yeah, well, I think, and that's the difference, isn't it, really, between, sort of slavery and what, maybe you could call corporate slavery, and a true internship is there's a path, right, to go from being the guy who gets the coffee to being, the manager, and then maybe, who knows, one day the CEO. But if you're just going to, as you say, if you're going to make coffee for 6 months and then goodbye, that's not offering a future to anybody.
Okay, one question though, but these people are being paid at the end of the day. Sorry, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a sensitive topic, but just from a business perspective, say companies, corporations such as Zara, McDonald's, etc. Maybe these are jobs that they need to be done and to be completed, and they see that these students or this form of labor, they can complete these tasks, and why not? They're still getting paid. Is it justifiable to be paying them the minimum wage, or?
Well, actually, I think it's, my personal feeling is that really it's not so much about the money. I mean, I think it all comes down to a type of social responsibility on a large corporation or on any business to provide a future to people that you're working with. And, really, I think, you come out of university, and coming out of university here in Europe is different from like America, because when you come out of university in America, you're saddled with God knows how much debt, and you have to pay it off. And that's a question for another podcast.
Yes.
How fair that is. But here, I think that, I don't think that there should be an expectation that you leave university and you go and you earn 100,000 euros a year and you're a manager. No, I think that, let's start at the beginning and learn those skills that maybe you didn't learn at university, like how to manage people and how to be part of a workforce, work in a team, and And then you sort of, and I think the money's not the question. I think the question is, as you say, am I going to make coffee for 6 months and then goodbye, or do I have a future? And I think it's a big responsibility that the companies need to take up to not abuse the young generation, because at the end of the day, they are the future of the country. And if you treat them like that, what's going to happen?
Finished listening to the natural conversation between Chris and myself on the topic corporate slavery. If you didn't understand the full conversation, make sure to turn on subtitles, listen to the conversation again, and make sure to focus on vocabulary, grammar, and how we expressed ourselves talking about corporate slavery. To help you out, I have chosen 5 useful expressions and vocabulary which appeared throughout our conversation. The first interesting word which came up throughout our natural conversation is a perk. A perk is a noun, and it's an advantage that one person has because of their job. So they are entitled to this because of what they do. It's somewhat similar to a bonus. In the conversation, this sentence came up. Maybe they have great perks in their job. Perks is a more natural way of saying advantage or bonuses. So if you're talking about some advantages or bonuses you may have because of your job, then you can use perk. In the conversation, the phrasal verb to be saddled with something also came up. If you are saddled with something, it means that you are burdened with something. In the conversation, we saw the sentence, when you come out of university, you are saddled with debt. This is a more natural way of saying you are burdened with debt. Throughout the conversation, we also saw the phrase a quick side note being used. We saw it being used in the following example. The word itself, a quick side note, is why the Italians say ciao to each other. We use this phrase, a quick side note, when we want to connect some idea or some topic to that topic we're talking about. We use it with something that's loosely connected to the topic. Throughout the conversation, the phrase to spring to mind also came up. Friends, if something springs to mind, it means that it suddenly came up. It suddenly appeared. Spring is used here because it indicates a sudden movement. It indicates that it suddenly occurred. Another example of this phrase being used is when I hear that song, memories of summer spring to mind. So here, memories of summer come to my mind. The final phrase, to be famed for something, means to be widely known. In the conversation, the sentence came up, Amazon is famed for being a modern and innovative company. Famed for is a nice natural expression you can use instead of saying it's famous for. Friends, this is only one section of the full lesson materials that Using English members have received. Enroll and become a Using English TP member to receive a grammar analysis, more vocabulary lessons, and most importantly, to speak about corporate slavery and other interesting topics with other Using English TP members. Take the first steps today. Enroll in Using English TP, start speaking in English, and become a confident and fluent English speaker. See you inside.